Federal High Court grants DSS permission to detain Omoyele Sowore for 45 days. Kaduna State government gives conditions for El Zakzaki's medical trip, 6 first-class emirs as sureties. In international news, U.S. immigration sweeps up hundreds of illegal residents. In the sport, 35 players invited for under-23 African qualifiers between Nigeria and the Sudan.
This is ANN News.
I'm Olajumoke Olatuji. The Federal High Court in Abuja has granted approval to the Department of State Services, DSS, to detain Sahara Reporters publisher Omoyele Sowore for 45 days. We reported on Wednesday that the DSS made a court application seeking to detain Sowore for 90 days while it conducts investigations over his call for revolution protest. Justice Taiwo ruled that the detention order would be renewable after the expiration of the first 45 days in late September. While Justice Taiwo ruled an ex parte application, there was no counter-argument by Sowore's legal team to the ruling of the ex parte application. Kaduna State Governor Nasir El-Rufai has set up a judicial commission of inquiry to investigate the violent conflict and killings in Kajuru and Kachia local government areas of the state. The governor announced the establishment of the commission in March to assist the government and communities achieve peace and justice. El-Rufai urged members of the warring communities to embrace common humanity and respect everyone's rights to life, liberty, and legitimate livelihoods. The governor says members of the commission were picked for the assignments based on their knowledge of the state, expertise in the areas of security management, conflict, and peace building. The commission is headed by Justice Isha Aliyu, a judge of the Kaduna State High Court, while Edward Ando, a director of commercial law in the Ministry of Justice, serves as the secretary. Meanwhile, the Kaduna State government is asking for stiff conditions to be attached to the court approval that Sheikh Ibrahim El Zakzaki and his wife Zinat proceed on a foreign medical trip. Justice Darius Kobo of the Kaduna High Court gave the permission on Monday for the leader of the Islamic movement in Nigeria and his wife to travel to India for treatment following injuries they sustained during the group's clash with the Nigerian army 3.5 years ago. The state government, which sued Zakzaki and his wife for culpable homicide, has ruled out 7 measures that would ensure that the defendants do not seek asylum in India. The state government is asking the court to make sure El Zakzaki, his wife, and each of the other defendants produce 2 prominent sureties, including a first-class chief or emir to qualify for the foreign medical trip. The government has also instructed the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to undertake all necessary diplomatic arrangements and protocol to ensure compliance with the conditions of the medical leave. Kaduna State government says it still plans to appeal the court's order permitting El Zakzaki and his wife to go on the medical leave. A Moroccan delegation led by the Director General of the National Office of Hydrocarbons and Mines, Amina Ben Kadra, has participated in an Abuja meeting of the steering committee of the Nigeria-Morocco gas pipeline with the major international oil and gas companies. New CEO of the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, NNPC, Mele Kyari, says the meeting, which he said was to present the progress of the Nigeria-Morocco gas pipeline project. The 2 sides emphasized that this large-scale project is to develop the regional integration of Africa and to deliver gas to people and industries, while allowing Nigeria to secure a new route to export its abundant gas resources. Kyari says the project will also accelerate the economic and social development of populations and provide an alternative source of gas for Europe. President Muhammadu Buhari has signed into law the AMCON Amendment Act 2019, which the federal government says would make it easy to retrieve the more than 5 trillion naira debt owed by some prominent Nigerians and corporate bodies. The new law empowers AMCON to put under surveillance all the bank accounts of the individual debtors and their companies. The AMCON Amendment Act fine-tunes the 2010 Act by increasing the powers of the corporation to enforce the recovery of debts from persons owing legacy banks. AMCON will also have access to any computer system, component, electronic or mechanical device of any debtor, with a view to establishing the location of funds belonging to the debtor. The company is also now empowered to obtain financial information on the debtors from any financial institution. Eco electricity distribution company is assuring its customers of improved electricity supply during the Eid al-Kabir holidays. EKEDC also urged those on analog meters to apply for prepaid meters under the meters asset providers through its website. The company's general manager of corporate communications, Godwin Idemudia, says EKEDC would ensure that customers enjoyed the holidays. Idemudia says the electric company would ensure that whatever location it receives from the national grid would be distributed equitably to ensure improved supply within the period.
Coming up, African stories. UN World Food Programme says it will increase relief food in DRC Ebola hotspots. And later, international news. U.S. immigration arrests hundreds of illegal immigrants.
You are watching ANN.
Whether in your house, at your office, on your phone or online, we are there. We have the facts behind the headlines. We cut to the chase with the news you really need. We cover every angle. We are the bigger, better news network. We are African News Network. ANN. Watch ANN News on MITV from a truly African spirit.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. Now to African stories. Rwanda and the Congo are jittery about a further spread of the highly contagious Ebola virus, so they are discouraging people from traveling across their border. Travel restrictions are part of a measure taken by Rwandan and Congolese health officials who met in Rwanda late on Tuesday. A statement issued after the meeting says those merely crossing the border for non-essential reasons like attending workshops and religious crusades would need clearance from both governments. Rwanda briefly closed its border with Congo last week after a patient tested positive for Ebola in Goma, a Congolese city of more than 2 million people. The city is just 4.5 miles from Rwanda's main border town of Gisenyi. More than 1,800 persons have died of Ebola in eastern Congo. And still on Ebola, the World Food Programme says it will increase relief food distribution in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The efforts will target 2 eastern provinces where more than 1,800 persons have died of Ebola since last August. Reporter Chris Okamringa has more.
The Ebola outbreak in DRC was largely confined to the provinces of North Kivu and Ituri, but it recently spread to Goma, a densely populated city that's close to the Rwandan border. Humanitarian agencies like the World Food Programme have scaled up their activities in preparation for a wider outbreak.
Regarding this situation, we have decided to increase our food assistance to these Ebola patients, their families, and also to the contacts.
The Ebola outbreak has disrupted the lives of many people in North Kivu province, and their situation has been made worse by the insecurity in the area.
They cannot go to work, they cannot go to the field, to farm their lands and so on. So this is why we distribute this food.
The head of the DRC's Ebola response says they'll apply new strategies to contain the disease.
So we will introduce also a screening for all patients coming there with fever. We will also introduce the rapid tests for malaria and for Ebola. So we will detect a case of Ebola very early and take measures for the vaccination and also for the surveillance and isolation of the patients.
Health officials have urged the locals to maintain basic hygiene and avoid contact with bodily fluids from infected people to protect themselves from contracting Ebola. The DRC's interim health minister, Pierre Kangudia, has traveled to Goma to meet with Rwandan officials to assure them of the DRC's commitment to stop the disease from spreading. The meeting comes a week after Rwanda temporarily shut its border with the DRC after an Ebola death was reported in the eastern city.
The United States says it is not ready to remove sanctions against the Sudan and would not remove the country from its list of state sponsors of terrorism until long-standing issues are solved. Remaining on the U.S. terror list makes Sudan ineligible for debt relief and financing from lenders like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Removal from the list potentially opens the door for foreign investment. Although international mediators have called for the country to be removed from the list after a constitutional declaration was signed earlier this week, paving the way for a transitional government, the U.S. says issues of human rights, religious freedom, and counter-terrorism efforts would have to be looked into before it can engage with the Sudan. Ethiopia has an issue of illegal migration where some of its citizens embark on dangerous journeys to reach Europe. Now, many of them fail in that bid and return home. Despite Ethiopia's improving economy, the country still faces challenges creating jobs. Koleta Wanjohi reports.
40-year-old Idris Yusuf was a security officer in the Amhara region of Ethiopia before he decided to try life outside the country. Through human traffickers, he attempted to get to the Persian Gulf states to seek work. However, he got stuck in war-torn Yemen. The International Organization for Migration rescued him in May.
When a father goes as a migrant, he is basically doing it at the expense of the livelihood of his children and at the expense of his safety. When he returns back empty-handed, what will the children say? What will he tell them? What will they eat? And so many people like us say, what will we return back to? I'm telling you honestly.
The IOM estimates that about 20,000 migrants, mostly from Ethiopia, attempt the dangerous journey through Yemen's war zone each month. Ethiopia finds itself struggling to prevent people from leaving, even as its economy is praised for growing rapidly.
Amongst of the people who are unemployed now, a large number of young people are unskilled. So they are dropouts from primary and secondary school. So making sure to use the technical and vocational qualities we have to be able to also skill these young people on particular market-related skills on key areas will be an important endeavor to get to these 3 million job targets we have for this year.
He says the country's quest to create at least 14 million jobs by the year 2025 is greatly hampered by the difficulties small and medium enterprises have getting off the ground.
They face key policy-related issues. A majority of them face access to credit limitations. It's not just a mere unavailability of finance, it's the difficulty of acquiring it, because many enterprises are requested to have collaterals or guarantees to be able to be secured against the amount of money they actually take from either microfinance institutions or commercial banks.
The government is now planning to loosen collateral restrictions in order to assist small entrepreneurs. Ethiopia is also looking to promote more jobs through the private sector by reviewing its investment laws. This will open up for more foreign direct investment, especially in sectors that in the past years had been restricted to only domestic investors. But whether people like Yusuf will benefit from these reforms is unclear. He is sure he will stay in Ethiopia, but does not know what others will decide. He says many may leave again because they don't want to come back home empty-handed.
When we return, international news. U.S. immigration arrests hundreds of illegal immigrants. And later, sport. Coach Amakwakabo invites 35 players for AFCON qualifying matches.
You are watching ANN.
We are on the road every day, canvassing throughout Africa for news you really need. We follow the story everywhere, from every corner of Nigeria to the wide African expanse. We bring you what's making headlines. We connect you with news you can use. ANN, African News Network, in a truly African spirit.
Welcome back. This is ANN News and International Stories. The Japan-South Korea trade row appears to be easing as Japan announced on Thursday it has granted the first permit for the shipment of chemicals to South Korea. These are for use in high-tech materials and come under Tokyo's new export requirement that has heated up tensions in Seoul. Trade Minister Hiroshige Seko said in a rare announcement that no security concerns are raised by the shipment. Experts say the Japanese move may be aimed at calming South Korea's nerves over Tokyo's export curbs. It is also to show there was no trade ban in place. South Korean president remains cautious but says he hopes the impact of Japan's measure would not be severe as Seoul had feared. The race by illegal immigrants in the U.S. to hide from immigration authorities has ended for some. In raids on Wednesday, officials rounded up and detained nearly 700 undocumented migrants. This is part of President Donald Trump's announced crackdown on illegal immigration. Officials said Hispanic migrants constitute of those detained. They also said anyone intending to migrate to the U.S. must follow American laws and go there legally, or they should not go at all. U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Mississippi said those who employ illegal aliens for competitive advantage or so may make money, would be found out or punished. Interim Head of Immigration and Customs Enforcement Matthew Albans said children of detained parents will be sent to live with relatives or other families. Now, an election for a prime minister will take place next month in Israel, and previous efforts did not produce a coalition government. In the lead-up to the elections, there is growing discontent among Israelis over some issues in the country, and Stephanie Fried reports.
It seems every few days, disgruntled Israelis are clogging junctions and highways, demonstrating against racism, government corruption, disability stipends, plans to draft religious Jews into the army. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is blazing paths when it comes to forging new international ties and agreements. At home, his report card is less favorable.
Mr. Netanyahu's problems, and when you want to give him an overall appraisal, is in the domestic area. There's no question about it.
Problems include a slowing economic output, or GDP per capita rate, during the past half-decade. Food and cost of living expenses are 25 to 75% higher than the OECD average. Critical congestion is hurting productivity. Israelis pay some of the highest car purchase and fuel tax rates anywhere. Protests happen throughout the world every day. In Israel, if there's not a change now, the experts say, down the pike, the country is headed for serious trouble. A key issue is education and critical defense spending. In Israel, the two are linked.
About half the children today in Israel are getting a third world education. They belong to the fastest growing parts of the population. So when they grow up, are only going to be able to support a third world economy. A third world economy cannot support a first world army.
Israel's leaders have a history of fixing economic, defense, and political crises under pressure. That may be what's needed to maintain future stability and keep protesters off the streets.
It is clear what trade conflicts can do to two nations and among many countries. The U.S.-China conflict is an example. World economies have tumbled and stock exchanges plummet. To promote sensible ways to resolve trade disputes, nearly 50 countries have signed an international mediation treaty in Singapore. Reporter Mira Lee was there.
A landmark event for dispute resolution as 46 United Nations members signed an international treaty on commercial mediation. To be known as the Singapore Convention on Mediation, it aims to boost international trade and give businesses greater certainty by helping parties resolve cross-border disputes through the process of mediation. This means that a neutral party can help the two sides reach an agreement in a less confrontational manner, instead of long-drawn and expensive legal battles. During his formal address, Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong called it a breakthrough which will benefit businesses, providing them with greater flexibility and efficiency.
The Singapore Convention on Mediation is the missing third piece in the international dispute resolution enforcement framework. Businesses will benefit from greater flexibility, efficiency, and lower costs, while states can enhance access to justice by facilitating the enforcement of mediated agreements.
The United Nations representative Stephen Matthias termed the treaty as innovative, adding that it will ensure the global acceptance of mediation as a dispute settlement mechanism.
Uncertainty surrounding the enforcement of settlement agreements had been identified as a main obstacle to the greater use of mediation. The Convention sets the standards for enforcing and invoking settlement agreements, the requirements for reliance on settlement agreements, and the grounds for refusing to grant relief.
Dispute resolution experts echoed Matthias' sentiments, saying that the convention will promote the use of mediation, especially in Asian countries, where it has existed as a means of settlement method for centuries.
You know, I am very optimistic about the future of mediation. I think it's tremendously impressive that we had so many signatories to the convention on its opening day. This augurs well for the future of that enactment and also general support for the concept of mediated settlement agreements.
Having the UN treaty named after Singapore cemented the Republic's reputation as a haven for international dispute resolution. During the Singapore Convention Week, apart from the signing ceremony, the International Insolvency Federation opened its first office outside of London for the first time, and an international dispute complex, the Maxwell Chambers Suites, is also scheduled to open.
Up next, sports. Coach Amakpakabo invites 35 players for AFCON qualifying matches. Please stay with us.
You are watching ANN.
Whether in your house, at your office, on your phone or online, we are there. We have the facts behind the headlines. We cut to the chase with the news you really need. We cover every angle. We are the bigger, better news network. We are African News Network. ANN. Watch ANN News on MITV from a truly African spirit.
Welcome back. This is ANN News in Sport. National Under-23 coach Imama Amakpakabo has invited 35 players ahead of Nigeria's Under-23 Africa Cup of Nations qualifying tie against South Sudan next month. The Under-23 AFCON is scheduled for Egypt in November, where Africa's 3 representatives at the men's football tournament of next year's Olympics in Tokyo will emerge. The Olympic Eagles are away to Khartoum for the first leg of the fixture next month before hosting the Sudanese in Asaba 4 days later. Confederation of African Football Disciplinary Committee has declared Tunisian side Esperance as winner of African Champions League. The announcement came after the CAF found Esperance opponents Moroccan Casablanca guilty of abandoning the second leg of the final in May. CAF's executive committee concluded that a match should be replayed at a neutral venue, but Wednesday's ruling by the disciplinary board overturns that decision. That is ANN News this evening. Thank you for joining us. For details on these and other breaking stories, visit our website, annafrica.news. Conversation continues on our social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at ANN Africa TV. I am Olajumoke Olatuji. Have a pleasant evening.